Captain Vyx'lor Tan of the Galactic Coalition Forces stared at the application form on his desk with all four of his eyes blinking in asynchronous confusion. The Coalition had been desperate for medical personnel since the Hegemony invasion began 3 solar cycles ago. But this had to be some kind of mistake. "Commander Prell," he barked into his comm unit. "Get in here." His second-in-command, a lanky Zelteran, with blue-tinted scales and exceptionally long fingers, appeared at his door within moments. "Yes, Captain." This human application, Vyx'lor slid the datapad across his desk. "There must be some error in the translation matrix. It says here that his previous occupation was combat medic with something called the United States Marine Corps. What in the 7 moons is that?" Commander Prell picked up the datapad, his translucent eyelids flicking rapidly as he scanned the document. "Ah yes. Humans have fractured planetary governance, Captain. This Marine Corps is one of their military branches, quite prestigious according to their standards." "Military?" Vyx'lor's facial ridges rose in alarm. "We requested medical personnel, not soldiers. The Coalition was very specific about non-combatants only for this mission." "Well, technically," Prell's voice took on that irritating tone he used when about to deliver unwelcome news, "humans combine these roles. Combat medic means he's trained primarily as a healer who operates in battle zones." "Preposterous." Vyx'lor slammed a clawed hand on his desk. "No civilized species would send their healers into combat. It's barbaric. Humans aren't known for being conventional, sir." Vyx'lor sighed deeply, his throat sac inflating and deflating with the effort. "Do we have any other options? The Epsilon 9 outpost needs a medical officer immediately." "Not within the required time frame, sir. All other qualified applicants have been assigned to the primary battlefronts." "Fine." Vyx'lor growled. "Process the human's application." "What was his name again?" "Jackson. Carson Jackson. Notify Jackson he ships out tomorrow. And Prell, make absolutely certain he understands this is a non-combat position. The Epsilon 9 outpost is a medical facility. The last thing we need is some battle-crazed human causing a diplomatic incident." "Of course, Captain." Prell made a formal salute, touching his forehead with all 5 fingers splayed. "Though if I may speak freely." "What is it?" "You might want to review the report from the Terran-Grak conflict last year. The humans were surprisingly effective." Vyx'lor waved a dismissive hand. "The Grak are mindless brutes. Any species with basic technological understanding could defeat them." "As you say, sir." Prell bowed slightly and left the office. Vyx'lor turned to the large viewport behind his desk, watching the distant stars. He had a bad feeling about this human. But what choice did he have? The wounded at Epsilon 9 needed care, and this Carson Jackson was the only medical professional available. 14 solar rotations later, Dr. Melorra Zith scurried through the corridors of Epsilon 9, her 6 limbs moving in perfect coordination as she balanced multiple medical instruments. The outpost had received an emergency transmission. A transport ship carrying wounded Coalition soldiers had been diverted to their facility after a Hegemony ambush damaged their engines. "Dr. Zith," called out Nurse Gala, a rotund Flobian whose gelatinous body quivered with excitement. "The human has arrived." Melorra nearly dropped her equipment. "Already? I thought he wasn't due until next week." "Apparently, he requested faster transport when he heard about our staffing shortages." Gala's voice bubbled through her speech membranes. "He's waiting in your office." Melorra quickened her pace. She had read about humans but had never actually met one. Their reputation was complex, violent but compassionate, primitive yet ingenious. And now one would be working alongside her in the medical bay. She swept into her office, prepared for her first encounter with this enigmatic species. The human Carson Jackson stood with his back to her, examining the medical diagrams on her wall. He was tall by Epsilon 9 standards, with a solid frame that seemed almost unnaturally dense compared to the more common species in the Coalition. "Dr. Jackson, I presume," she ventured. The human turned, and Melorra fought to keep her mandibles from clicking in surprise. He was younger than she expected, with sharp features and alert eyes that seemed to assess everything. His skin was a light brown, his hair cropped extremely short, and he stood with a straight-backed posture that screamed military training. "Just Jackson, ma'am," he replied with a slight upward curl of his lips. "I'm not a doctor by your standards. Combat medic and field surgeon is more accurate." His voice was deeper than Melorra had anticipated, with an unusual cadence that her translator struggled to perfectly match. "Well, just Jackson," she replied, extending 3 of her upper limbs in the traditional Thraxi greeting. "I am Dr. Melorra Zith, Chief Medical Officer of Epsilon 9. We're grateful for your assistance, though I must admit your arrival is rather sudden." The human looked at her extended limbs with momentary confusion before carefully taking one in his hand and giving it a gentle shake. An unusual gesture, but Melorra appreciated the attempt at cross-species etiquette. "Heard you folks were short-staffed and had wounded incoming," Jackson said with a shrug. "Figured there was no point waiting around." "Yes, about that," Melorra began, but was interrupted by the outpost's emergency alarm system. "Attention all medical personnel. Incoming transport with critical casualties. Docking Bay 3. This is not a drill." Jackson's demeanor changed instantly. The casual posture vanished, replaced by a focused intensity that Melorra found both impressive and slightly alarming. "Where's your triage area?" he asked, already moving toward the door. "Follow me," Melorra replied, racing ahead on her multiple limbs. "The transport was attacked by Hegemony forces. We're expecting at least 20 wounded, possibly more." "What's their combat medic situation?" Jackson asked as they hurried through the corridors. "Combat medic?" Melorra felt confused. "The transport is a medical evacuation vessel. They have a standard medical officer, but no combat personnel. This is a non-combat zone, Mr. Jackson." The human made a sound that Melorra's translator didn't catch. "Yes, someone should tell the Hegemony that." They arrived at the docking bay just as the damaged transport was finishing its emergency landing procedures. The ship's hull showed significant weapons damage, with several large scorch marks indicating direct hits from Hegemony particle cannons. The docking bay doors opened, and chaos erupted. Wounded soldiers poured out, some walking, others carried by their comrades. The scene was overwhelming, blood of various colors soaking uniforms. The air filled with moans and shouts in a dozen different languages, and then without warning, weapons fire erupted from inside the transport. "Hegemony boarding party," someone screamed. They were hiding inside the cargo hold. Melorra froze in horror as 6 heavily armed Hegemony soldiers stormed out of the transport, firing indiscriminately at the wounded and medical personnel. Epsilon 9 was a medical facility. They had minimal security, certainly nothing equipped to handle a Hegemony strike team. She turned to warn the human, only to discover he was no longer beside her. Jackson had already sprinted toward the nearest wounded coalition soldier, who was clutching a standard-issue sidearm. In one fluid motion, the human grabbed the weapon, checked its charge, and took cover behind a stack of supply crates. "Get the wounded to safety," he shouted at Melorra. "I'll hold them off, but you're a medic," she cried in confusion. The human's face transformed into something Melorra couldn't quite interpret, a baring of teeth that wasn't exactly a threat display, yet held no warmth. "I'm a combat medic," he corrected, and then opened fire with a precision that stunned her. The first Hegemony soldier dropped immediately, a clean shot to what passed for their head. The remaining attackers scattered, clearly not expecting resistance. Jackson moved with practiced efficiency, changing positions between shots, using the chaotic environment to his advantage. Melorra snapped out of her shock and began organizing the evacuation of the wounded. Everyone to Emergency Bay 2, security personnel to Docking Bay 3. Through the chaos, she kept glancing back at the human. Jackson had acquired a second weapon from another fallen soldier, and was now advancing toward the Hegemony position, firing both guns with devastating accuracy. His expression remained calm, focused, as if this violence was as natural to him as healing. 2 more Hegemony soldiers fell under his onslaught. The remaining 3 took defensive positions inside the transport, trying to establish a foothold. "Get a security team here now," Melorra shouted into her comm unit, as she helped a wounded Arcanian towards safety. Security is responding to a second attack at the main entrance, came the panicked reply. This was coordinated. We're being invaded. Melorra's heart sank. Epsilon 9 wasn't equipped for this. They were going to be overrun. A thunderous explosion rocked the docking bay. For one terrible moment, Melorra thought the Hegemony had detonated some kind of bomb. Then she realized the explosion had come from inside the transport, where the 3 remaining Hegemony soldiers had been hiding. And standing in the smoking doorway of the transport was Jackson, holding what appeared to be an improvised explosive device fashioned from medical supplies and a portable power cell. Area clear, he announced, walking calmly back toward her, both weapons still at the ready. Blood of the distinctive purple shade that marked Hegemony forces spattered his uniform and face. How what? Melorra couldn't form a coherent question. Standard anti-boarding procedures, Jackson replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Now where's your primary defense point? We need to establish a secure area for the wounded before the main force arrives. Main force? What main force? Doc, this is a probing attack. Jackson spoke slowly, as if explaining something obvious. First wave is always small, designed to test defenses and create confusion. The main assault comes after. Melorra stared at him in horror. This is a medical facility. We're protected under galactic convention. That strange expression crossed the human's face again, teeth bared, eyes crinkled. It took Melorra a moment to recognize it as something humans called a smile, though there was no joy in it. You really think the Hegemony cares about conventions? Jackson asked. His comm unit crackled to life with frantic reports of more Hegemony forces approaching the station. We need to move now, he continued, checking his weapons with practiced ease. Get your patients secured. I'll handle the incoming hostiles. But you're supposed to be a medic, Melorra protested, her vocal sacs vibrating with distress. Jackson looked at her with an expression that somehow combined weariness, determination, and that unsettling not quite smile. I am a medic, he said firmly. But I'm also a Marine, and right now, the best medicine I can provide is making sure those Hegemony bastards don't reach my patients. He gestured to the wounded being evacuated. Those are who I'm here to protect, by any means necessary. As he turned to face the oncoming threat, Melorra realized with sudden clarity what Captain Vyx'lor had failed to understand. Humans didn't separate these roles, healer and warrior, because to them they were aspects of the same duty, protecting life, even if it meant taking others. And as alarming as she found it, Melorra was suddenly very glad to have this particular human on their side. Jackson checked his weapons one last time and glanced back at her. Get those wounded secured, Doc. I've got a feeling this is going to be a long day. The sound of approaching Hegemony troops echoed through the corridor, growing louder by the second. And Doc, Jackson added, that strange smile returning. If anyone asks why your medic is covered in enemy blood, tell them it's just part of the job description. Part 2. The Epsilon 9 command center had transformed from a quiet administrative hub into a frantic war room in less than 2 hours. Dr. Melorra Zith watched as Station Director Quill Parrock, a normally composed Viridian whose skin typically remained a calm green hue, now flashed anxious patterns of yellow and orange across his epidermis. 4 simultaneous breach points, Parrock muttered, staring at the station schematic. How did they get through our security protocols? We're a medical facility, for Star's sake. The Hegemony doesn't care about such distinctions, replied Security Chief Vax, a burly Chronaxian whose exoskeleton bore the scars of previous conflicts. They see only strategic value. Our location near the Kessel Nebula makes us an ideal staging ground for their fleet movements. Melorra cleared her throat, drawing the attention of the command staff. We've established a secure area in Medical Bay 6 for critical patients, but we need more time to stabilize them before evacuation. Time is precisely what we don't have, Parrock replied, his skin darkening to a stressed purple. The nearest coalition battle group is 3 hours away, minimum. Then we hold until they arrive, came a firm voice from the doorway. All eyes turned to see the human, Carson Jackson, stepping into the command center. Melorra barely recognized him. Gone was any trace of the medical professional who had arrived just hours ago. This Jackson was transformed, his uniform now supplemented with pieces of security armor he'd scavenged, weapons strapped across his body, face streaked with grime and determination. You, Director Parrock's skin flashed red with alarm. You're the human medic. Yes, sir. Jackson nodded curtly. And currently, your best chance at holding this station. Security Chief Vax bristled, his exoskeleton plates clicking with indignation. I have 17 trained security personnel defending this station. With all due respect, Jackson replied, his tone suggesting very little respect was actually being offered. Your 17 trained personnel are glorified hall monitors. I watched 2 of them try to negotiate with a Hegemony assault trooper. They were following protocol 4. They're dead now. Jackson cut him off flatly. Protocol doesn't mean much when the other side is shooting to kill. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Melorra watched the human with growing fascination. There was something both terrifying and reassuring about his calm confidence amid chaos. What do you propose, human? Director Parrock finally asked, his skin settling into a resigned gray. Jackson stepped forward, pointing to the station schematic. The Hegemony has secured docking bays 1 and 2, plus the main entrance hall. They're pushing toward the central hub, but they're being cautious, methodical. That gives us time. Time for what? Vax demanded. To rig this place to be a lot more dangerous than they're expecting. Jackson replied with that unsettling not quite smile Melorra was beginning to recognize. I need access to your medical supplies, maintenance equipment and whatever weapons your security team can spare. Director Parrock's skin pulsed with doubt. You're proposing to turn our medical facility into a war zone. Newsflash, Director, Jackson retorted, tapping the live feed showing Hegemony troops advancing through the station. It already is a war zone. The only question is whether you want to lose it entirely or fight back with everything you've got. He's right, Melorra found herself saying, surprising everyone including herself. The Hegemony won't stop. We need to protect our patients and the human seems to know how. Jackson gave her a brief nod of thanks before turning back to the schematic. We create choke points here, here and here. He indicated 3 key corridors. We evacuate all non-essential personnel and patients to the emergency pods on level 3. The critical cases who can't be moved, we fortify medical bay 6 with everything we've got. And who will implement this plan? Vax asked skeptically. My security team is already stretched thin. I will, Jackson stated simply. With volunteers from your medical staff who can follow basic instructions. All eyes turned to Melorra again. As Chief Medical Officer, the medical staff answered to her. My team will help, she declared, standing taller on her 6 limbs. Many of us come from worlds that have faced Hegemony aggression. We know what's at stake. Director Parrock's skin finally settled into a determined blue. Do what you must, human. But remember, your primary duty is to save lives, not take them. Jackson's expression hardened. With all due respect, Director, sometimes those are the same thing. 3 hours later, Nurse Gala rolled rapidly down the corridor toward Medical Bay 6, her gelatinous body propelling her faster than most would expect. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive crackling hiss of Hegemony plasma rifles. They've breached Checkpoint Delta, she called out as she passed through the reinforced doors of Medical Bay 6. The barricade didn't hold. Inside, a scene of controlled chaos greeted her. Dr. Zith and her team worked efficiently among the critical patients while armed medical personnel stood guard at key positions. And in the center of it all, directing both medical and defensive efforts with equal authority, stood the human. How many? Jackson asked without looking up from the makeshift explosive he was assembling from medical gases and power cells. At least 10, Gala bubbled anxiously. Heavy assault unit with a brute-class warrior leading them. Jackson nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Right on schedule. They've hit every trap we laid out, but they're learning our patterns now. He finished his work and handed the device to Gala. Take this to junction box 22. Press the activation switch, then get clear. 20-second delay. I don't understand why we don't just surrender, whispered one of the younger doctors, a Thalaxian whose quills vibrated with fear. The Hegemony might spare us if we cooperate. We're medical personnel. The human paused and turned to the frightened doctor. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that sent shivers through everyone who heard it. 3 cycles ago, I treated survivors from the Hegemony attack on Proxima Medical Station, Jackson said quietly. Want to know what cooperations got them? The Hegemony executed the staff and harvested the patients for biological components, so no surrender isn't an option here. A distant explosion shook the station, followed by the sound of alarms. That's checkpoint Echo gone, Jackson announced, checking his weapons. They'll be coming through the maintenance shaft next, exactly where we want them. Melorra approached him, her medical instruments now sharing space with an improvised blade fashioned from surgical equipment. Jackson's security chief Vax is down. His team is falling back to our position. The human nodded grimly. Get your most critical patients moved to the inner chamber. We're about to make this corridor very uncomfortable for our visitors. The coalition reinforcements, she asked. Still 20 minutes out according to the last transmission. Melorra's mandibles clicked nervously. We won't last 20 minutes against a full assault. That strange human smile appeared on Jackson's face again. Then it's good they won't be getting a full assault, isn't it? He tapped his comm unit. All units, execute Operation Hornet's Nest. Now, throughout the station, carefully hidden devices activated simultaneously. Corridors filled with aerosolized sedatives from the medical stores. Maintenance robots reprogrammed with Jackson's tactical instructions emerged from their bays, carrying supplies and creating distractions. Emergency lighting failed in strategic sections, plunging Hegemony forces into darkness while station personnel, forewarned, activated their night vision aids. The commotion echoing through the station was immediate and chaotic. What did you do? Melorra asked, fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Created confusion, Jackson replied, moving toward the barricaded entrance. Turned their superior numbers into a liability, made them fight on our terms, not theirs. A security officer burst through the side entrance, bleeding from a wound to his arm. They're coming, at least 15 with heavy weapons. Jackson checked his makeshift barricade one last time, then turned to address the room. Medical personnel, wounded patients, and the remnants of the security team all looked to him, this human, who had arrived as a healer, and transformed into their defense. Listen up, he called out, his voice carrying a calm authority that belied the dire situation. Coalition forces are coming, but we need to hold this position. Every patient, every staff member makes it out alive, that's the mission. Anyone not actively treating patients, you're on defense now. He quickly assigned positions, distributed weapons, and explained the simple but effective tactics they would employ. There was no time for detailed training, but Jackson distilled complex military strategy into basic instructions that even the most pacifistic medical staff could follow. Remember, he concluded, they expect to find frightened medical personnel, not defenders. That surprise is our edge. Use it. The first explosion against their barricaded door came moments later, rocking the entire bay. Here we go, Jackson murmured, taking position with a clear line of fire. Steady everyone. The second blast breached the outer door, filling the corridor with smoke and debris. Through the haze, the first Hegemony troops appeared, their armor gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. Wait, Jackson commanded as the medical staff tensed. Wait, now. On his signal, Melorra activated the trap they had prepared. The floor plates in the corridor, coated with a mixture of surgical lubricant and sedative gel, became instantly treacherous. The leading Hegemony troops stumbled, their balance compromised. Jackson's first shots dropped 2 soldiers before they could recover. The rest of the defenders opened fire a moment later, creating a devastating crossfire in the confined space. The battle that followed was nothing like Melorra had ever experienced. The human moved with lethal efficiency, alternating between directing the defense and personally engaging the enemy. When his weapons ran low on charge, he switched to improvised explosives. When those were exhausted, he engaged in hand-to-hand combat that left even the Hegemony's specialized shock troops reeling. But the Hegemony forces kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. For every attacker that fell, 2 more appeared. The defensive line began to falter. Fall back to position 2, Jackson ordered as a section of their barricade collapsed. Controlled retreat, cover each other. Melorra helped a wounded security officer move deeper into the medical bay, where their final defensive position awaited. As she turned back to assist another, she saw Jackson standing alone at the failing barricade, buying time for the others to retreat. 3 Hegemony soldiers rushed him simultaneously. In a blur of motion that Melorra's eyes could barely track, Jackson dispatched 2 with his combat knife. The third, a massive brute-class warrior, caught him with a powerful blow that sent him sprawling. "Jackson!" Melorra cried out, certain she was about to witness his death. The human rolled with the impact, coming up with a medical injector in his hand. Before the brute could press its advantage, Jackson plunged the device into a gap in its armor, emptying the contents, a concentrated stimulant meant for cardiac emergencies, directly into the creature's bloodstream. The effect was immediate and gruesome. The brute's biological systems, overwhelmed by the powerful stimulant, went into catastrophic failure. It collapsed, its nervous system misfiring violently. Jackson retrieved his weapons and rejoined the retreat, bleeding from several wounds but moving with determined purpose. "How much longer?" Melorra asked as they reinforced the final barricade. Jackson checked his comm unit, now crackling with new transmissions. A rare genuine smile crossed his face. "They're here." The station rocked with fresh explosions, but these came from outside coalition warships engaging the Hegemony vessels that had been waiting to claim the station. "All personnel, this is Coalition Battle Cruiser Vindication," a new voice announced over the station-wide comm. "We have engaged hostile forces and deployed boarding teams to secure the station. Hold positions." The relief in Medical Bay 6 was palpable. Some of the staff wept openly, others simply collapsed from exhaustion. Jackson, however, remained vigilant at the barricade, weapon ready. "It's over," Melorra told him, placing a gentle limb on his shoulder. "We've held out long enough. It's not over until our patients are safely evacuated," Jackson replied, though some of the tension left his posture. "But yeah, we did good." "Good?" Nurse Gala bubbled incredulously, her gelatinous form quivering with emotion. "You saved everyone. How did you know what to do?" Jackson finally lowered his weapon as coalition troops secured the corridor outside. "Because saving lives sometimes means fighting for them," he said simply. "That's what combat medics do." 1 week later, Captain Vyx'lor stood before the Coalition Defense Council, his report complete. The council members sat in stunned silence, absorbing the details of the Epsilon 9 incident. "Let me be clear," said High Councillor Ziren, her luminescent tendrils pulsing with confusion. "This medic single-handedly coordinated the defense of an entire medical station against a Hegemony assault force." "Not single-handedly," Vyx'lor corrected. "But yes, he led the effort. The after-action reports credit him with saving 97 lives, including all 42 critical patients under care at the time of the attack." "And the Hegemony casualty?" asked another councillor. Vyx'lor hesitated. 38 confirmed, possibly more. Murmurs spread through the council chamber. "All from one human." Councillor Ziren pressed. "Yes, High Councillor. I thought we requested a non-combatant," she said pointedly. Vyx'lor's facial ridges flushed with embarrassment. "We did, High Councillor. But it seems that humans have different definitions of these roles than we do." "Evidently," Ziren replied dryly. "And where is this Carson Jackson now?" "He has requested reassignment to the Coalition Forward Medical Corps, specifically to stations most at risk of Hegemony attack." The council chamber erupted in discussion. After order was restored, High Councillor Ziren addressed Vyx'lor again. "Captain, based on these events, would you recommend we accept more human personnel into our medical services?" Vyx'lor thought of Dr. Zith's report, which had ended with a simple statement, "I would trust Carson Jackson with my life both to heal it and to defend it." "Yes, High Councillor," Vyx'lor replied firmly. "In fact, I would recommend we specifically request more of their combat medics. The Hegemony clearly does not respect our medical facilities' protected status. Perhaps it's time our medical personnel could protect themselves, even if it means they occasionally return from their duties covered in enemy blood." Councillor Ziren asked, a note of challenge in her voice. Vyx'lor stood straighter, his 4 eyes focused with newfound conviction. "With respect, High Councillor, especially then." As the council moved to vote on his recommendation, Vyx'lor reflected on how profoundly one human had changed his understanding of what it meant to be a healer. The coalition had always separated these roles, those who save lives and those who take them. Humans, it seemed,
understood something the rest of the galaxy had yet to learn, that sometimes the strongest healers were also the fiercest warriors, and if the Hegemony continued their campaign of targeting medical facilities, they would soon discover just how dangerous human medics could be. After all, as Jackson had told Dr. Zith during the battle, the best medics don't just know how to save you, they know exactly how to stop you too.